Are you ready for next level growth in your business? Welcome to the Millionaire Maker Show, where we pull back the curtain on the exact strategies, tools, and mindsets that build million-dollar empires. If you're hungry for more time, more freedom, and a whole lot more impact, you've come to the right place. Buckle up, because we're about to ignite your business journey. Now, here's Lindsay.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Millionaire Maker Show. I'm so excited for today's guest, Mr. Shawn Anthony. He is the Networking Maestro, talent manager, and founder of PodProMax, and the voice behind the acclaimed School's Over Now What podcast. He's renowned as a master networker. He has forged invaluable alliances with the world's top coaches, influencers, and podcasters. I'm so excited to have him on today to talk about strategic podcast placements that position your brand for speaking, TV, and biz deals you've been waiting for. Put your hands together for Mr. Shawn Anthony. Welcome to the show, Shawn.
Hey, listen, phenomenal job with the intro. I think if I can take you on the road everywhere we go, you got to roll with us now. So great job. Excited to be here.
I love that. In the green room, Shawn, we were just talking about podcasting, and you had this line, which was podcasting can change your life. Let's start there, Shawn. How is that?
Podcasting changed my life. It's allowed for me to travel the world. Most importantly, it allowed for me to leave a job where I was working 60 hours a week as a brand manager for a company we all love, and that's Target. One thing about podcasting, it allows for you to get out there, put your voice out there, but find your community, find people who are just like you. They just haven't heard you yet. I think a lot of people would be surprised on how it can change their life and their surroundings.
I love that. So walk us through, you have a really popular, high quality, amazing podcast, School's Over Now What? How did that come to be? To just tell me a little bit about that story.
Yeah, I stumbled across podcasting back in 2018 is when I actually started my show, School's Over Now What? But the way I stumbled across it, I actually was traveling over 6 hours because I took a job promotion. And as I'm traveling back and forth, and I did this for 6 months, I stumbled across the podcasting app. And you can imagine back then it looked foreign, but I was listening to guys like Ed Milet, Evan Carmichael, Chris Dramapath, and I realized these guys are unique. And I said it respectfully because they've all been on my show, but they didn't look like me. They didn't sound like me. And if I was able to get people in the boardroom to pay attention and listen, I could possibly create a podcast and bring those individuals on. But I think when you start a show, it's okay, what are you going to name it? How are you going to get people to buy into what you're doing? And for me, it had to be a mission. And the mission was School's Over. Now what? I had achieved so much corporate success. I saw all of my peers not being able to find that job or start that business, and bringing in those experts allowed me to tie it all together by asking them that question.
And so at that point that you quit Target and you started this podcast, did you already have all of those connections, or did you use the podcast to create those connections?
When I left, my last corporate job was a brand manager for Target. Before that, I was a brand manager for a company called Belk, and before that, I was a brand manager for Macy's. So when I stumbled across podcasting, I actually was working still at Macy's. And what I found out was I started to network and have these amazing guests on our show, from Seth Godin, from Tiffany the Budgetnista. And as I was doing this, I was connecting more and more with them. And everyone started asking me, how are you podcasting? Teach me how to do it. So I started to teach people how to podcast. And later on, I started to manage some of the people that were on our show.
That makes sense. So you mentioned earlier about building a community on your podcast. Can you expound a little bit on that? What do you mean by that? And how do you foster community on your
Yeah.
podcast?
I think you have to figure out what are the social media platforms that people are using and how can you be on those platforms to create your community. So one of the things that worked for me, remember when the Clubhouse days was the biggest things of all time. When Clubhouse came out, I had a club on Clubhouse called Podcast Secrets Revealed. And during this club, I had some of the best people in podcasting join, from Pat Flynn and Lewis Howes to Amy Porterfield. And for weeks on weeks, I got this club to over 42,000 people. So we were constantly talking about not only how to, improve your podcast, but also School's Over Now What? I would bring on special guests from our podcast, and then we'll take them behind on this community and give them a backstage audience view. So I think as you're growing a show or thinking about community, what are those other platforms where you can nurture them? It could be school.com. It could be any of those platforms that allow for you to take your audience a little bit deeper.
So basically, they go listen to the podcast, but you're on social media where you can connect with them every day, see who they are, and actually have these real relationships with your listeners.
Yeah, and Patreon is also a huge key. We started a Patreon as soon as the show launched. When we had a Patreon, we were allowing for people to know who some of our special guests were before they actually got there. So giving them something behind the scenes, something that you feel like is more access than what you're already putting out is definitely another way to nurture that community.
That makes sense. Now, I have to ask you, do you still have your 42,000 people on Clubhouse?
I'm not clubhousing, but the group still exists. Podcast Secrets Revealed is still up there. I think now it's at 44,000. You have to adapt, right? So Clubhouse is no longer the big thing. Then where else were you going to join to? There's other communities as well. But I think what really helped us is we started to add like our lead magnet into our actual community. And so by doing that, we also got a lot of email addresses. So now we have these email addresses from that club that we market to all the time. And we promote podcasting to all the time. So I think as you find these communities, what are you going to offer or give to take them even off of that platform? And I highly recommend building your email list doing that way.
So that you own all the people on the email list. You always know how to communicate with your audience and those kind of things. Do you have any tips for that lead magnet piece? How do we get them off the podcast? Give us your best lead magnet tips.
Yeah, I think you have to want to figure out what is your audience listening to you for, right? So if it's a relationship show, my lead magnet I use may not work, but I give you an idea on how to do that. But for my show, people kept asking me, how do you start a podcast? So the lead magnet was what is the first or what is the number one question everyone's constantly asking you and just give it away for free. So people are asking me that. So here comes a podcast starter kit, right? But you might be a relationship podcast where you're giving out tips and advice, and you might have even more of a market where you can really talk to and say, hey, look, this is how you should date someone when you're in your 30s. It might be a checklist. It might be check their credit, who knows, whatever it may be. But this could be a very enticing lead magnet for someone that's listening to you to say, you know what? I want to opt in for that. And you can continue to grow that community. You can start having retreats, conferences, you name it down the road.
I love that because you have this big community on your email list that you can now communicate with. So your audience is all right there at your fingertips. You talked a lot about big guests that you've had, a lot of really awesome and inspiring people. What is your advice for people who are starting or like on their podcast journey and they don't have those kind of contacts? How do they go find really great guests for their podcast?
Yeah, I think they can do it. I didn't have these contacts come out of nowhere. I was doing a podcast in my living room in North Carolina, nowhere near LA or New York. And I think the strategies for people have to change, which is why I'll wait to talk about PodProMax because the strategies are absolutely insane. So instead of going for right now, let's say, Lindsay, you wanted to have Ed Milet on your podcast, right? You're probably saying, okay, how in the world can I get Ed Milet on my podcast? You have to go through a different way to get his attention, right? So Ed Milet has his own podcast. And so when I got the opportunity to interview him at his house in Laguna Beach, he was so familiar that I had already interviewed about 10 people who were already on the show, the Gerard Adams, the Jasmine Stars. So he had already had an upside of how the conversation could go, but he felt comfortable. So that now when you make that pitch to whoever you want to make that pitch to, you can include names that they have references for, people they respect, people they might be following. And it's only going to lead you further into that opportunity. There was this thing happening where people shared their favorite top 5 podcasts. And I constantly was kept getting tagged with him. And that's when he actually sent in my DM and he said, let's make something happen. So I think wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this from, you got to tighten up on your strategy.
Makes sense. And have a real strategic approach to getting those guests, like putting them on a list and then really going after them instead of just waiting for people to come to you.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about PodProMax. What does PodProMax do? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in 2021, when I became a full-time entrepreneur by turning podcasting into a six-figure side hustle, I knew, okay, how am I going to really start making some noise? And I started brand managing talent. The first talent I ever brand managed was Terry Igioma, who's the number one course creator on Teachable and teaching people how to trade stocks. As I was brand managing her, I started to pay attention to what was really driving the ROI, what was making her an eight-figure entrepreneur through some of the strategies that we were working on. And I understood the value of podcast placement. Not just, hey, go do this podcast, but strategically placing these podcasts with the right hosts and making sure they have the right conversations that could lead to sales. It could lead to a really good show. And everything prior to this point of being a full-time entrepreneur, I had spent so much time evaluating and identifying talent, even beyond my corporate days. I used to be a party promoter, so I know how to get the attention of other people. And so PodProMax, we're so excited about this. We started doing podcast tours. And so the very first podcast tour we did was for Arlen Hamilton, who's a huge VC in a space. And that is strategically placing them on shows that expand their reach. And it helped her have a very successful conference, Your First Million Live with Gary Vee, Rich Paul, and others. And so podcast tours became a huge thing for us at PodProMax, as well as representing talent.
That makes sense. So, a podcast tour is essentially if someone has a book coming out or they want to do some sort of promo, then you're going to line them up with 10 of the most perfect podcasts, make sure that promo all happens together and they're on the right podcasts.
Absolutely. And what we found out about working with talent, even from a podcast tour perspective, there became so many other opportunities. There became opportunities for speaking. There became opportunities for book deals. There became opportunities for new brand partnerships with some of the hosts that they were working with. And so this led us to really start thinking about how do we start moving with talent. Proud to announce that we represent a variety of talent that ranges, represent Matthew Knowles, Beyonce, and Solange's dad. We also represent people that are on national TV, The Polites, who have a show on Hulu and A&E called 50/50 Flip, which I think you guys should definitely check that out as well.
Wow, that's cool. You mentioned when you're searching for podcast talent, what does that mean? What are you looking for, Shawn?
Yeah. So, for example, let's say we have really good relationships with a lot of shows and we understand what certain shows want and the conversations they want to have. For example, there's a show called Parlay Initiated, which is a relationship show, has roughly over 300,000 YouTube subscribers. But we know the type of conversations that really work for both of those hosts, Tyshawn and Ryan. There's conversations around God, family, conversations around divorce. So we know if we have a talent that we rep who is out there vocal about the importance of family, the importance about having a faith, that's recognizing the talent that the person has and how they could be a potential great match, which leads to a very viral episode. So I think that's the key is identifying different pockets and opportunities for things like that.
So let's talk a little bit more about the business of podcasting. We have podcasts that can promote our brand and create our brand. What are the other opportunities available for people who are podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, there's several, right? A lot of people get so confused and say they have to have a brand deal, right? I turned podcasting into a six-figure side hustle with no ads, no brands. I did it with myself. I turned myself into the ad. So right now, you might have a show, and your whole entire show is about arts and crafts and how many different designs you create and how do you go about doing that. But you might start having arts and crafts classes virtually that you can start doing advertisements for in the middle of your podcast to get people to click that button and give you $29.99 a month. And next thing you got a community of hundreds of people who are paying you on a monthly thousands of dollars. And now you're in a completely different situation, right? You don't have to wait for that bread. You don't have to wait for that company. Also, too, if you're someone who, let's say you spent some time on social media, you got a decent social media following, you exactly how to get people excited. There might be particular companies, might be your community who would love to be your sponsor for your show, just so you're out here endorsing them. We've seen those type of deals get done where people get paid thousands of dollars before they even start a podcast because their brand and likeness is so high. So I think there's so many different ways to get to it. I think you can get creative from a community, from live events, and also yourself being paid to speak at other places. I remember the very first time I got paid to speak, and it actually was a university. Think about my show, School's Over Now What? So it's heavy in education. So Temple University, a school I probably could never got into, paid me $4,000 for 30 minutes of virtual time just to talk about podcasting. So I think there's no limit in what you can do in the space. I think you just got to get in it.
And they found you because of your podcast. Is that right?
Absolutely, 100%. A show called Schools Over Now What? Education, interviewing people strategically in a certain way. You're going to get people to talk about you. And I think name your podcast is so important is what is your long-term vision for it? I think that could be a key. But also you can name your show where it automatically puts you in the realm and in the space that you want to operate in.
Can you give us some examples of that?
School's Over Now What? So, you know, that's a perfect example.
Any other tips around title? Because titling a podcast is so important. I really like this point that
Yeah.
you made around you can title it to position yourself with the other people that you want to be hanging around with. So can you give us any other examples of that?
Yeah, when it comes to title, it has to be a mission, or it has to, when I hear a title, it has to be something I want to be a part of, or it makes me, as soon as I hear it, it puts me into the mood of, oh, I can feel that. Like when you hear school's over now, what? You like, oh man, my grandma asked me that question. Like I've asked myself that question. So it puts you in the mood, right? There's other shows that you can think about that have like crazy, wordy selection on the wordplay, horrible decisions, but spelled with a WH, and women talking about relationships and sex. That's creative. So there's so many different ways you can automatically put yourself in the space.
I like that. Let's talk a little bit about branding. So you're obviously incredibly good at branding, and when we talk about getting brand deals or even getting a following and building a community on your podcast, the brand is really important. So share with us, what are some tips you have around a strong brand for a podcast?
Branding is beyond podcasting. I think some of my greatest teachers in branding have been people I have been bold enough to be quiet around and just observe. I've been very fortunate and blessed to have the interactions with the people I had interactions with, the lessons I learned from them. But one thing I can tell you that I'm constantly learning now is branding is uniquely different for everybody. I might like a certain style of brand that might be quiet, mysterious, unique, that might create curiosity. But there might be someone else who loves a brand that's loud and vibrant and colorful and pops. And I think once you identify what your brand is, this is how you excel. And I think some people right now struggle to figure out what their brand is. So I'll give you an idea of getting an understanding of how your brand might be perceived. If you look at your Instagram, and let's say it's going to take it's going to take probably at least at bare minimum, maybe 30 posts. There's so many people who say, yo, you need to post every single day. You need to post 3, 5 times a day. The people that say that, they don't, there's two things. Either they have to stay in the forefront, they're constantly selling things on the back end. I understand that. But the people that say that, they also may not have figured out what really excites their audience. And so if you have enough sample size of 30, you can go through your metrics and identify the top three style pieces of content. So it could be quotes, it could be you talking in your car, or it could be your podcast, right? It could be you cooking in the kitchen. If you look at those 30 posts, identify those top three, all you have to really do is keep continuing creating content like those three top performing pieces of content. And you're going to find yourself finding a brand. You're going to find yourself falling into a niche, that mom that likes to cook on the weekends and does something with her son. She might turn out to be the biggest advertiser and sponsor for a company that's selling laundry detergent because she got the vibe for it, right? So you know I think, identifying your brand, because so many times you can look and see, other people and think that's you. But when you really sit down and think about it, it may not even be you at all. You might be uniquely positioned to operate differently.
I love that, and I like your iterative approach to really branding too. So, like, put some stuff out there and look at the analytics, because the analytics will always tell you. They'll always tell you what is
Yeah.
working and what isn't working.
Men lie, women lie, numbers don't.
Mhm. Will you say that again?
Yeah, men lie, women lie, numbers don't.
I love that. That's gonna be the name of our title. That's gonna be our title here, Sean. I love it.
Thank you.
Now we bring up analytics. Of course, I wanna turn to analytics of the podcast. So, how important are those? What are we watching for? What do we need to know about analytics, Sean?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that you got a real audience that's listening. There's this thing called listennotes.com. So if you go to listennotes.com, it'll show you like the percentage of like true audio listenership. So many people are fooled by Instagram reels that get high shareability. That's just a really viral TikTok post. But people that are actually putting their headphones on, listening, and the lower the score on listennotes.com, the higher the percentage that score has of really having a true community. So I urge people to check that out. And so I think that's one of the things we look at, even from our strategic podcast placement, is does this show actually have an audience? And I think
Right.
people are confused also by YouTube numbers versus audio numbers. There are shows that are extremely good on video cast. They have hosts that, they have, a certain, aura or how they conduct themselves where they might be visually more entertaining to look at. Right. And there's also podcasts who might not have the biggest video numbers, but they got people who are driving in the car, working out, taking lunch breaks with them. They got a different style community. So I think you can never underestimate the power of the podcast who even operates only virtual versus the podcast that operates, in in-person studios or right in front of your locations.
Yeah, and it seems like, and I'm curious on your take on this, that visual podcasts have really boomed. Like a lot of people are doing those. It builds a lot of credibility for you and authority. Do you see that trend continuing on? These fancier, very visual podcasts.
Oh, absolutely. Podcast is the new media, and I think, in the early 90s, you had to really go to the TV station route. You had to go get a degree in journalism, and the years we live in now, all you have to do is, invest in a microphone, get you the right lighting or equipment, and just start putting yourself out there. And if it doesn't blow up, if it doesn't go crazy, I can promise you it's going to help you learn how to talk better. It's going to help you learn how to answer questions better, and you're going to have a huge opportunity to network and meet the right people.
Personal improvement all day long as a benefit there. What's your guidance on, so yes, we wanna be publishing our podcast. Do we wanna be publishing our podcast on YouTube? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, if you're recording on video, why not? I realize if you go to podpromax.com, outside of the podcast tours, outside of the talent management, it's a struggle trying to do it all yourself. We give you the actual teams that can edit your shows and upload it for you. If you're already recording a video, there's no reason why you shouldn't go to that next step of taking those show notes and getting that audio file and putting yourself out there. There are other ways to reach more people.
Okay, let's turn the conversation from running your own podcast to getting on other people's shows. If we have our eyes set on getting on some really great shows, what are your best tips for that?
Yeah, a couple things. You want to do research on the show itself, right? I get pitches all the time. I'm pretty sure you do as well. And a lot of times you can tell real quickly, like, they have no idea what the show is about, or the format and the pitch just looks so wrong. I think you have to spend some time understanding, okay, why do you even want to be on our show? And what did you see? There might be a conversation that you might have listened to and you felt like you could have added value to it, or a question that was missing that you might be the expert in, that they stopped the conversation and they wish they could have went further with. You might have the ability to cover a certain topic that might be a timely topic that might make you the right person for it. That's a different strategy to approaching that. And also, too, brag a little bit about yourself. If you've done a couple of podcast interviews, if you've been featured in any media publications, you want to add all that to your resume on why you should be the person right in front of that podcast host.
That makes sense. So obviously, most of these podcasts are going to have a place on their website where you go and apply. Do you also follow the host on social? And is there anything else we can do besides talk ourselves up and apply?
Yeah, you have to find a way to find that email or find that person and make that pitch. And I know it's tough and I know it's hard because a lot of times those pitches end up in the junk mail, they end up in the trash can. And that's why I am a huge supporter of when you identify your gift and your gift comes to you very easily, you lean upon it and you don't shun away from it. And it doesn't feel like work anymore. We spent so many years in the podcasting space when no one even knew what that app was. We've established so many high relationships with the PodProMax way and how we go about pitching. It's also about where the pitch is coming from as far as a source. And people fact check, people look stuff up. And for us, when they click on that PodProMax name, they see all the information, the shows, or things we're doing. It even higher gets the credibility of the person we're talking to. We're talking like CAA type announcements here, right? So I think it's important to align yourself with representation. Anyone that's ready to be on a bunch of podcasts, they're ready for the next level. They put themselves out there already. They got a voice. They feel confident. They know they have something to bring. I think that's probably the best next step.
Yeah, getting representation, because ultimately what I'm hearing you say, Sean, is like it's about relationships and managing relationships. You obviously value relationships. Talk to us a little bit about relationships and managing those.
Yeah, one of the best things I ever did is I've always been really good with relationships. And again, back when I was telling you about what do you do with the least amount of effort, I remember having a job review. I was a brand manager for a company. I had a job review that got and exceed expectations. And if you're listening to this right now, if you're working a job, that boss, that supervisor, they're getting paid to tell you how you can get better. And so as he gave me exceed expectations, he read to me, he said, Your ability to connect with others and think about them and keep those relationships strong is powerful. It's going to help you. And I looked at it and I said, I'm doing that for them. Why can't I do that for me? So I identified that gift, and it takes a unique way of looking at relationships. It's being, someone of integrity, someone people trust,
Mhm.
someone that has been on all sides of the table, the side that's winning and the side that's trying to figure it out. And I think a lot of people respect that. And I think that's important when you look at those qualities in a person.
Yeah, integrity, following through, and just really managing and caring about people and having an authentic relationship with them.
Absolutely. And I also had the back to this job stuff, because I think a lot of people are in these jobs and they have yet to figure out or connect the dots. And one of the dot connections for me is I had the highest engagement score out of a whole entire East Coast of 4 states. I thought about what made my engagement score so high is that I naturally cared about people. And I also made sure that I put the right talent together that could achieve the results they were achieving. I got promoted 6 times in 4 years. That's unusual, right? So looking at those different aha moments, connecting those dots so you can get out of the matrix is key.
I love that. Get out of the matrix and identify it. Anyone can do that. Okay. I want to ask you now about AI. So you've heard these AI podcasts. What's the future of podcasting with all of this AI craziness?
I think AI can be a huge tool in the editing process. I don't foresee like myself wanting to listen to an audio podcast as AI. Like AI tools used, yeah, absolutely. You want to use clips, chop up, edit it. I get all that. But podcasting is about true connection. It's about true, genuine voices. One of the things that I think would excite anyone to want to start a podcast is imagine if you were to record a podcast right now. You and I both can be gone 100 years from now, but our great grandkids can listen to our voice, hear this interview. Do you know how much money I would pay to hear my great grandfather? I don't even know his name. So
Yeah.
it's a completely different level of touch point, right? To get between someone's ears and influence them. Um, that's a lot of trust and vulnerability.
I love that the bots and AI cannot replace that humanness, the authenticness, and just like the real human connection. They'll never replace us, Sean.
Yeah, they can't do that.
No, they can't. All right. Sean, what is one thing you wish you would have known before you got started?
Man, you got this.
Oh, I
That's
like
it.
that.
You got it. You got it. There's a reason why you have the thoughts you have. You think the way you think. You want what you want. It's already yours. You got it. You guys have to start operating like that's the case. And you look around and everything you thought about happens. There's a folder album in my phone where I used to take pictures of stuff. I used to go to the car lot and I would take a picture, a Porsche of some sort. I would go certain places and I'll take a picture of a watch or or anything. And then I would look back and within days, all those things happen. You got it. I think you have to, if you're struggling figuring out that you don't got it, you're around the wrong people. And that's it.
I love how you put that, Sean. Thank you so much for being on the show. What a true pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for sharing all of your insight. Before I let you go, I'm going to turn the time over to you. Let us know how people can find you and anything else you want the audience to know.
Yeah, you can find me on all platforms at Shawn R. Anthony _. You can listen to the podcast Schools Over Now. You also can go to podpromax.com/tour. You can see all about PodProMax tours. Or if you're someone who just simply needs to make sure your podcast is being edited and distributed on all channels, you can go to podpromax.com. Listen, I appreciate you. And for those of you that have been listening to us, my last things I'll tell you is to dream it, believe it, go out and get it.
I love it. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Millionaire Maker Show. If you love this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share how you're leveling up your business. Want more? Connect with Lindsay Anderson and get the tools you need to crush your goals at lindsaya.com. Until next time, keep pushing, keep growing, and turn those business dreams into reality.